Hey, what is going on guys? Ardent Stealth here, and in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the new strong and weak picks for patch 8.24b. So in this patch and in 9.1, there's a lot of different AD carries that are getting buffed. In 8.24b, there's like half of the AD carries that are getting buffed, and then in 9.1, another bunch of AD carries are getting buffed, and an AD carry getting buffed here in 8.24b is Caitlyn. So Caitlyn's getting two different changes. Her Q damage is being increased there by 20 at all ranks, it looks like. So it's a really nice change there to Caitlyn. It will increase her ability to bully in the laning phase and make her laning phase stronger. Her ultimate's range is also getting a very big increase here. It's going from 2000 range up to 3500 at rank 1, and it's just gonna be 3500 at all ranks there. So I think overall some pretty nice buffs here to Caitlyn. I think that Caitlyn right now in the meta in 8.24 here is a pretty weak AD carry, so I do think that with these two changes combined, it should bump her up into a solid A tier AD carry. So Hail of Blades is getting a really nice buff for 8.24b. The attack speed is being increased from 75 scaling up to 125 just to 110% at all ranks. So this is a really nice change here to a few different champions. I do still think it's going to be a niche rune, and I don't think that with this changes it's just going to be super good on a ton of different champions, but some picks that I do expect to get buffed from these changes include Azir, Rek'Sai, possibly Jhin. I think that Jhin could now go back to running Hail of Blades, but Fleet Footwork is still going to be pretty good on him. Master Yi, Kindred, and then possibly Udyr as well. But for Udyr, I do think that like Phase Rush, Press the Attack is still really good on him. So unless this ends up being super good, I don't see Udyr running it over one of those two runes. But for Azir and Rek'Sai, I think those are two champions that are going to benefit the most. Rek'Sai in this patch right now is actually doing best with Hail of Blades. It's actually his best keystone right now win rate wise. So with these changes, and especially with that second change there, the auto attack reset, it's now going to increase the attack limit by 1. That's going to be really good on Rek'Sai, because what you can do is you can auto attack, use your Q for the reset, and it's going to give you an extra attack speed auto from Hail of Blade. So it's a really nice buff there to Rek'Sai, and I do think that with this change, Rek'Sai will become much stronger for 8.24b. So Vayne is getting a pretty big buff for next patch. Her ultimate is now going to reduce her Q cooldown by 50% on use. So to put this into perspective, Vayne's Q is on a 2-second cooldown at max rank, and this means when you pop your ultimate, it's going to drop down to 1 second, and that's just pretty insane. Like, Vayne's going to be super mobile in teamfight. She's going to be very hard to pick off. The fact that her Q gives her stealth as well with her ultimate means that you're just not going to be able to kill a good Vayne in a mid to late game teamfight, and I just think that if you're a good Vayne player for next patch, you should be seeing some really good success on her. So next up here, Corki's getting a really nice change. His ultimate's damage is being increased by 15, and this is going to be a really nice change here to Corki, because right now in this patch, you cannot Q ult the back wave and one-shot it. It'll get the back wave very low on HP, but it's not going to one-shot it, and you just have to auto-attack the back wave to end up clearing it out. So with this change here, if this allows Corki at level 6 to Q ult the back wave and one-shot it, it's going to allow him to just shove in waves a lot faster. Once he gets his package, it's going to allow him to start roaming quicker, and it's obviously going to allow him to deal more damage as well in the laning phase when he is poking. And because his ult is on a very short cooldown, that damage increase is definitely going to add up over time. So I do think here with these changes, Corki is going to now be a pretty solid pick. He's not going to be super OP or anything, but I do think he's now going to be a pretty viable A tier mid laner for 8.24b. So Singed is getting 2 buffs for next patch. His base HP is being increased, and then his E's max health damage is being increased. So these changes are nice for Singed, but it doesn't really help him out a ton in his harder matchups. A lot of Singed's harder matchups aren't tank matchups, and therefore the E max health damage increase isn't going to help him as much in those kind of matchups. It's going to help him in the matchups that he's already really good into, which are tank matchups and champions that will be stacking health. So I do think the base HP increase there is really nice for his laning phase. It does allow him to just be a little bit more aggressive in lane, and he's not going to get poked out as much, but I don't think this jumps him up a tier for 8.24b. So 3 different buffs to Varis here for next patch. His W's active minimum damage and active maximum damage are both being increased for next patch. So this is when you use your W and then after that you use your Q. The Q is now going to be dealing more damage for next patch, and then his ultimate's damage is also being increased there by 50 damage at rank 1, which is pretty big. What this means for Varis for next patch is that his all-in at level 6 does get a lot stronger, and in lanes to where you can play aggro, that's where you're going to notice this a ton on Varis. So if you're playing with a Thresh, a Leona, a Blitzcrank, one of these aggro lanes for next patch, that's where Varis is going to see these changes impact him the most. And I do think that with these changes in those lanes, Varis will be a much stronger pick for 824B. So Fiora is getting a small buff here. Her passive move speed decay is being increased from 1.5 seconds up to 2 seconds. So this does mean that Fiora, when she does go in for vital trades in the laning phase, that she is now going to be able to get that vital proc, and then she is going to have more movement speed for a longer duration. So her ability to get the proc and then get out is going to be easier to do so for 824B. But we are going to be seeing some Tiamat nerfs here that we're going to take a look at in a second, which will affect Fiora as well for next patch. So even though she is getting buffed here, she's getting indirectly buffed. So overall, I don't think her power level is going to rise a ton for next patch. And then it looks like some Ardent Supports will be getting stronger for 824B, so it doesn't look like they're going to be getting a ton stronger though, because Redemption and Ardent, the heal and shield power, are being increased by 2%, so it's a decent buff, but I don't think it's a buff that is going to just bring Ardent Supports right back into the meta. Forbidden Idol, the CDR on it is also being increased by 5%, but the completed items, like once you complete your Forbidden Idol into a Redemption or into an Ardent Sensor, those items are still going to have 10% CDR, so it's going to be a buff there in the earlier stages of the game for those supports. And then Mikhail's, the heal and shield power is going to be increased from 15 to 20%, and I do think that Mikhail's is a pretty undervalued item for supports, especially if you're going up against a heavy CC team comp. So with this buff here, it might make the item a little bit more attractive for next patch, and I do think that more support should be picking up Mikhail's after these buffs. So if we move on to the nerfs now for next patch, Tiamat, the cost on the item is being increased by 125 gold, and this is going to hit a bunch of different champions. The first one it's going to hit a ton is going to be Camille. This is really going to hit Camille in the jungle, especially because Camille does rely on that Tiamat quite a bit in the early game for her clear, and Camille top lane as well does rely on Tiamat quite a ton just for clearing out waves. And because Camille, unless she does use her E for the wave clear, she just doesn't have a ton of ability to shove waves super fast in her kit, so Camille will be nerfed by these changes. You got Fiora, Jax, Renekton. He shouldn't be nerfed as much compared to some of these other picks because he does have a bit more wave clear built into his kit. Shaco, Aurelia, Rengar, Warwick, and Shen, those are champions that I do think will be getting weaker for next patch because they're champions that do rely on the Tiamat to either clear the jungle or to shove waves out more than other champions. So straight off the bat, after her release, NiKo is getting nerfed right away. So she's getting a change here to her Q base damage as well as to her Q secondary damage. They're both being nerfed there, it looks like, just by a little bit, only by 10 on the base damage per level and then only by 5 on the secondary damage. So overall, I don't think this is enough to like drop NiKo down. I think that right now she is a very solid mid lane pick on the verge of, she's either a high A tier or low S tier. I think that right now she's a very strong pick in the mid lane, so don't expect these changes to drop her down. Still expect NiKo to be a very good pick for this patch. So next up here, 3 different nerfs to Pike. His MR per level is being lowered, his Q stab damage to minions and monsters is being lowered beyond the first target, and his R's execute damage at later ranks is being lowered. What this means for Pike is that support Pike stays a strong pick for next patch. These changes don't really affect him. Mid lane Pike, because of the Tiamat nerfs and because of the Q stab damage there to minions, it is going to affect him a little bit more, and even though these changes will affect Pike mid, I don't think it's going to be enough to drop him down. I think right now Pike is one of the most underrated, most undervalued mid lane picks for solo queue in the game. For competitive play, I don't think Pike's ever going to be really good in the mid lane, but because he's just got so much roaming potential in his kit, once he does pick up that Tiamat, it makes him a very strong pick for solo queue. So I still think that Pike is going to stay at least an A tier mid lane pick for 824B. So Zekes Convergence is getting a nerf for next patch. The burn damage is being lowered from 50% down to 30%, so this is really only going to nerf like 2 different champions down in the support role. Alistair and Rakan are 2 picks right now that are building Zekes quite a bit, and they're rushing it as their first item, so they're going to see these changes hit them the most for next patch. But for most other supports, they don't really rely on Zekes as a rush item, or they don't even build it at all, so I think this is a pretty small nerf here, and I don't really understand the nerf because I don't really think Zekes is a problem item. I don't really think it's like super OP right now because Rakan's sitting at like a 48% win rate, Alistair is sitting at a 49% win rate, so I don't think it's really breaking these champions, and I just don't really see why it's getting nerfed for next patch. So Alistair is getting 2 different nerfs for this patch, or 2 different direct nerfs. He's getting a change to his E to where the damage is being lowered, and then the auto attack damage after you get your 5 trample stacks is also being lowered. What this means here is that I think Alistair is going to drop out of S tier for next patch. With these direct changes, with Ardent Supports getting buffed, and then with Zekes Convergence also getting nerfed, I think that's going to be enough to drop Alistair down out of S tier, and I still think he's going to be a pretty strong carry support for next patch, but I just don't think he's going to be as strong, and I don't think he's going to be like one of the #1 supports for 824B. And then lastly, to round out the video, Cassiopeia is getting a nerf. This is targeted towards the Qmax Cassiopeia that has seen a rise over these past few patches and is actually an S tier pick right now in both the mid lane and in the top lane. Cassiopeia with these changes is going to get a bit weaker for next patch, but I don't really think it's going to make her, I don't think it's going to drop her out of S tier. I think that if anything, players will go back to maxing E out on Cassiopeia, but I still think that Qmax is going to be a pretty viable option even with these changes for next patch. So that is going to be all for this video, guys. That's what we're looking at for 824B here. Quite a few pretty big changes for next patch. I do think the most impactful ones are going to be the T-Mat nerfs, the Hail of Blade changes, and then also Vayne. I do think those Vayne changes are looking pretty crazy for 824B. With that being said though, guys, if you did enjoy this video, be sure to drop a like and subscribe if you have yet to already. So thanks for watching, have an awesome day, and I will see you in my next video.